Thunderstorms of Eden, Chapter 8. My first indoctrination, 1976 through 1977. My first indoctrination into the Sea Organization was a cleaning of some historical property that involved long hours of physical labor. It was called the EPF, Estates Project Force. It's a form of boot camp that sets the tone for what you will experience when you join the rest of the elite of the Sea Organization. This is when I was introduced to the whole paramilitary culture and had to call my superior, sir. This quasi-Navy-like environment even sported lanyards, uniforms, and in some cases medals and ribbons that gave the false impression it was part of something that required truly great sacrifice. This boot camp went on for several weeks in relative isolation with a single supervisor until we were transferred to our respective organizations. Mine was the American St. Hill Organization, ASHO, where I was initially recruited. How many kids over there at ASHO? I didn't experience the separation anxiety many recruits apparently do, because in the case of my family there wasn't much attachment to separate from. You were conditioned to identify with servitude for the greater cause and LRH's mission to clear the planet, thereby eradicating war, poverty, insanity, and hopefully soap operas. We bunked together in a communal living arrangement, and we were also subject to white glove inspections. We ate together, and all of our communications, letters, if you got any, were vetted to make sure there was no interference or in theta, i.e., nastygrams, coming from the outside world. You were essentially cut off from the rest of civilization, and any criticisms of Scientology were to be pointedly ignored. I was also chronically sore from all the physical labor, and the food wasn't much, but I thought that would change after boot camp. After several weeks, I finally made it back to ASHO, where I got a uniform allowance to buy black slacks in sky blue shirts. No lanyards were involved in my case, and I didn't get any of the cool-looking military uniforms or a hat. I learned that you had to move up in rank to get those. Instead, I soon got my first taste of the Sea Org's legendary penchant for in-your-face screaming. Screaming. Where have we heard that one before? He was a 30-something with a mustache, reddish hair, and eyes like agates. They were rather piercing and wild, as though he was jacked up on some sort of drug. These eyes were not your usual daggers. They were more like surface-to-air missiles. When they bore into mine, I was sure there was an impending apocalypse about to happen. His mustache would curl into his upper lip, making his demonic grin even more pronounced. When I came into his vicinity, the general vibe was that of a hunter who had just cornered his prey. He loved to scream and yell, and no one dared challenge him. Everything about him was bushy and spiky, like a post-apocalyptic porcupine. I would tremble in absolute fear and do what I could to avoid him. In some cases, I felt as though I was going through some sort of mental paralysis and wanted to curl up somewhere far away like a pale bug. I never outwardly reacted, so I at least kept my TRs in. But I was otherwise emotionally overwhelmed by his vindictiveness. My job was to examine anyone who came out of the auditing session. Anyone who came out of the auditing session. I used a device called an electropsychometer, or e-meter. It is described as a religious artifact and was designed by LRH for measuring very low voltages in psyche or the human soul, spirit, or mind. We were taught that it registered mental mass, and the reactions we would get during auditing would help us in guiding the pre-clear towards resolving their problems. Like children that are pre-clears. The pre-clear held 2 metallic cans that were attached to the meter via electrodes. In those days, they were mostly soup cans. If the needle was floating, lazily moving back and forth, that meant the session was successful. If it wasn't, they had to go back in and get whatever was missed fixed. Critics of this device equate it to a lie detector. Scientifically, no device can register someone's mental mass. Only physiological reactions to what the person is thinking, which differs greatly from actually reading someone's mind. In my position as an examiner, I was responsible for the parishioners, or general public, what I was before joining the Sea Org. These were the paying customers. They were required to make donations in order to continue any further services, who were not staff and were working their way up the bridge. My tormentor frequently accused me of not doing my job correctly in a high-pitched voice that is usually reserved for grunge bands. If I was anywhere within a mile radius of him, he somehow found me and devised ways to castigate me for imagined transgressions. In addition to the constant berating, all we ever did was work. We lived at the Hollywood Inn on Hollywood Boulevard, now the Information Center. There was nothing glamorous about Hollywood Boulevard at the time, and much of it was simply a dump. And for some reason, beyond my comprehension, there were always men wearing women's clothes and makeup, walking up and down Hollywood and Vine. You guys know. I had taken what few belongings I had from the apartment and bunked with 6 or so other women. Other than that, I did not encounter another minor during my tenure. They were at the cadet org, where infants and preteens of Sea Org parents were housed. One of the women had taken a bit of a liking to me. I think she viewed me as her daughter or something, so she looked out for me to a certain extent. That's enlightening. But there was apparently nothing she could do about my tormentor. Guys know what I say about the misogyny. I remember being so exhausted all the time and carpooling back and forth from Osho to the Hollywood Inn. We worked 7 days a week and up to 16 hours a day, and many times would pull all-nighters to get promo materials out. We would get an occasional morning off to do laundry or simply sleep. It was so bad that one morning I found one of my roommates asleep in the bathtub, with the water still in it. As I became increasingly miserable and sleep-deprived, the thought of an alien invasion or devastating earthquake seemed like a worthy distraction. It didn't matter that people would die. That didn't factor into my desires, and I didn't have the critical thinking skills to think through the consequences. There would probably be looting and deprivations worse than what I was going through. Instead, I viewed this fantasy as more of an adventure. My whole alien invasion fantasy was stoked by the original premise of the Sea Org. We were the long-lost loyal officers of the Galactic Confederation. Our motto was, we come back. We somehow were all converging at preordained locations is part of some galactic master plan to save the planet. We were the special ones. Many are called, but few are chosen, was the mantra. Of course, the Sea Org was a secret society of sorts, since we were part of the Xeno creation myth. But unless you had done that not-so-secret anymore auditing level OT3 or operating Thetan level 3, you wouldn't understand the context. But you can't really call it a creation myth, since Scientologists truly believe this happened. This is not a story created through the wisdom of the elders of some ancient tribe to teach others how to live a decent life. OT3 level introduces a character known as Xenu. Xenu was a galactic overlord who oversaw the Galactic Confederation circa 75 million years ago. He was quite an evil guy who wanted to deal with the overpopulation in this sector. Hold on, you guys. I just got to get a sip of tea. Overlord of the galaxy. So he hatched a plan to solve the problem. He and his army of psychiatrists tricked their victims into thinking they were coming in for income tax inspections. Instead, they were paralyzed and then frozen in a mixture of alcohol and glycol. This combination not only froze their bodies, but trapped their souls. Xeno brought billions of these frozen people to Earth, at that time known as Tegiak, in modified DC-8-looking spacecrafts, because Boeing hadn't invented the Dreamliner when LRH was doing his research. He had all these poor bastards stacked around volcanoes, and then nuked them with hydrogen BOMBs. These volcanoes included Vesuvius, Shasta, Washington, and Etna, to name a few. All these disembodied Thetans were captured by Xenu's troops using an electric ribbon. From there, they put them into special boxes for the disembodied and took them to implant stations in Hawaii and Las Palmas, the Canary Islands. There, the disembodied were forced to watch super colossal motion pictures for 36 days as part of the implant process, referred to as the R6 implant, with misleading data that had to do with God, the devil, space opera, and images from the world religions, to include the crucifixion. The end result is that God, religion, and the crucifix are all fabrications. They were also assaulted with images of auto accidents, sexual perversions, dissections, and other tortures. Trauma-based mind control come to mind. Once the implant process was complete, these Thetans were dispersed. The theory is that they had lost their individual identity and began mutating into clusters. As a result, these Thetans are adhering to all of us, sort of like superglue, many apparently in clusters or even possibly superclusters. This incident is known as the Wall of Fire. All those traumatized, disembodied Thetans stuck to us are the cause of all of our problems. They keep reliving the Xeno incident. And unless you get the whole mess cleared up, they are stuck on you forever. Xeno was eventually captured by the government contingent known as the Loyal Officers. They locked him away in a battery-operated electronic mountain trap, from which he had supposedly never escaped. I suspect the battery must be solar-powered. Earth is now known in galactic circles as a prison planet. I actually believe in that. I just added that. Meanwhile, we are all inhabited by these body Thetans, and only the processes of Scientology can remove them. LRH was the only one to come out of the Wall of Fire alive. at the expense of his health, supposedly. He supposedly emerged with a broken back, knee, and arm. The R6 implant is so malicious, it is calculated to kill by pneumonia and other afflictions, anyone trying to breach it. Hence, the level was kept strictly confidential until the advent of the World Wide Web. If you do not take this creation myth seriously, then you are, in the view of Scientologists, an ignorant bigot. Most Sea Org members don't know about this creation myth, since they, as in any other Orwellian dystopia, are fed propaganda and have little contact with the outside world, and many of them will never achieve that OT level since they are too exhausted to be auditable or are too busy saving the planet, so they never have time. That's how it's designed. This Scientology Star Trek-like organization was formed in 1967, 1 year after the release of the first episode of the original Star Trek, and around the time LRH discovered the Wall of Fire. There is an uncanny similarity between the insignia used to depict the United Federation of Planets in Star Trek and the Sea Organization's insignia used to depict the Galactic Confederacy. This sort of detail is not lost on a diehard Star Trek fan, Trekkie. Also, as a Trekkie, if you can't independently lift one eyebrow like Mr. Spock can, well, then you simply aren't Trekkie enough. Then came Star Wars. I saw Star Wars when it was originally released at the famous Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. It was the spring of 1977, and there was a buzz throughout the church about this movie and the correlations to Scientology. On a rare afternoon off, not sure how we managed that, but I think whoever was in charge wanted to see it as well. Several of us made the pilgrimage and waited in line for 2 hours to see what the hype was about. It was truly mesmerizing, and I can even remember where I sat and the smell of the theater. I think the aroma of popcorn was especially vivid for me, considering the horrid menu associated with the Sea Org galley. I never wanted this galactic myth to end. The movie only reinforced the idea that we were somehow an ancient order of Jedi-like beings who were honing our superpowers, but the reality wasn't matching up to the fantasy. Instead, I was in a perpetual state of unworthiness, since you are entirely responsible for the conditions you are in. So whatever anyone did to you, you pulled it in. These concepts, all part of LRH's grand philosophy, opened up all manner of convenient and creative interpretations and tortures. It was more like on-demand abuse, and it was constantly streaming on the Days of Our Dystopia channel. The make it go right, and you are entirely responsible for the condition you are in concepts are actually quite ingenious when you think about it. You can never win as a victim, and you become increasingly undeserving over time. If there is a condition beyond low self-esteem, then most Sea Org members have undoubtedly achieved this. And since you were there to save the planet, they constantly dangled the elusive carrot of redemption and freedom. But like bad Chinese manufacturing, things didn't quite work the way they were supposed to. You were also under constant threat about having any bad thoughts, as you were only a security check away from punishment, using the e-meter to make sure you didn't deviate from the established source equals LRH dogma. The slang term was sec check, which is just another term for thought police. Think, say, or do the wrong thing, and like little Timmy from that creepy Twilight Zone episode, It's a Good Life, you could get transformed into something hideous, like a Star Trek transporter malfunction, and then wished into the cornfield. As my hopes for an alien invasion or disaster faded, I found myself warding off a burgeoning group of suitors. These were mostly 20 to 30-somethings who, for the most part, had a difficult time separating me from the herd. A few did try to, but their fondling was rebuffed as privacy was virtually non-existent where I was working and sleeping. You're just food. The attraction of saving the planet soon took a back seat to my loss of will. I reached a stage where fighting against the tyranny of unworthiness was a losing battle, and I no longer felt any spark for the cause. I soon lived in a fog where my capacity for reason had been abandoned, vaporized like those Thetans who had suffered at the hands of the evil galactic overlord Xenu.